Have you ever been watching something and a character comes on, or you hear that an actor or actress has been cast in a particular role, and you just think to yourself, no, not you? I kind of had some thoughts like that on the Harry Potter series, and I figured while I still have all the books and films out from making the last video, I might as well touch on this too. So I picked my least favorite castings, and I would just like to say in advance that I know a way a character appears on screen is a combination of a lot of factors, including the actor/actress, the screenwriters, directors, editors, etc. But for simplicity, I'm going to focus on the portrayals themselves just so I don't get too turned around as I did in the last video. So gonna try and stay more focused this time. Oh, by the way, this list isn't in any official order. I just kind of wrote them as they came to me, so it's not like from best to worst or anything. It's just randomized. And I'd also like to say that I mean no disrespect to anyone. I know that these actors and actresses worked very hard on their roles, and I know it was a demanding job. So I just, I say this stuff with all due respect to the people who portrayed them, even if them in the role wasn't really my cup of tea. Which is kind of ironic because I actually do have a cup of tea because my voice gets really scratchy for whatever reason when I talk, and I don't understand why. So I sip on tea so my voice doesn't go But let's get into it. And first off, let's start with Narcissa Malfoy. My biggest problem with Narcissa Malfoy's on-screen portrayal is her just complete lack of emotion. I mean, Narcissa Malfoy is a character who, despite her snobby exterior and pureblood beliefs, is utterly devoted to her family, especially her son. And throughout the book series, the more her family is in danger, the more her character begins to unravel, until she eventually betrays Voldemort outright during the Battle of Hogwarts in the hopes of saving her son. And that was just missing in the film series, in my opinion. I mean, in the books, you see how much she dotes on Draco long before you ever meet her. Even in the first book, Draco says, "My father's next door buying my books, and mother's up the street looking at wands," which already suggests the closeness of their relationship, given that wands are the most important tool a wizard can have in his arsenal. It's your weapon, it's your shield, and for Draco to trust his mother to find him the right one is quite telling. And if you really want to deep dive into it, you could even suggest that this comes back into play later on when Harry takes possession of Draco's wand at Malfoy Manor during Deathly Hallows. Harry notes that Malfoy's wand felt, quote, friendlier, and that it performs just as well as Hermione's had done for him. Harry attributes this to having won its allegiance by taking it from Draco, but since in the Harry Potter world, wands almost seem to have some form of sentience, it could be a nod to the idea that both Narcissa and Draco secretly want him to succeed and free them from Voldemort's tyranny, and therefore the wand does what it can to help in that mission, not because Harry bested its master, but that he and the wand are both working towards the same goal. And, that's just speculation on my part, but it is obvious that he and his mother are bonded and that he trusts her more than anyone else. It's also mentioned in the first book that she sends him regular care packages, and I honestly cannot believe this, but I just flipped open Sorcerer's Stone telling myself that I have no clue where this passage is in the book and it's gonna take forever, and somehow I opened to the exact page I needed, page 144. I really cannot believe that. Thank you, universe, you probably just saved me 5 minutes of flipping through this book trying to find that page. But anyway, in Book 4, Goblet of Fire, Draco says that his father actually considered sending him to the Durmstrang School instead of Hogwarts, but his mom wouldn't hear of it because it was too far away, which I'm not really sure why it matters, since she and her husband clearly know how to apparate and could be pounding on Durmstrang's doors in 2 seconds if Draco told them to, but whatever. That's a little bit unclear anyway, considering the books and the films never really set a distance limit on apparition, but in Book 7, when Voldemort is abroad, he said that soon he would be close enough to apparate back to them, and it's just well, that's new. So, who knows? Point is, Narcissa loves her son more than anything, and in Book 6, Half-Blood Prince, we see just how much when her husband is in prison and Voldemort decides to cruelly punish their family for their mistakes by giving Draco a job that Narcissa believes will only get him killed. And that's probably Voldy's exact plan, too. This is the moment that causes her to start to unravel, and from this point on, the worse things look for her family, the more desperate she becomes. In the very beginning of Half-Blood Prince, she defies the Dark Lord's orders in hopes of saving her son, even going so far as to threaten and kind of attack Bellatrix and beg, literally beg, Snape for help. Any of this could have easily gotten her killed, loose lips sink ships and all, but to her it was worth the risk, because she can't just stand aside and do nothing. Her family means everything to her. I mean, she doesn't even seem to hate Harry on principle like most of Voldemort's followers. She seems to detest him because of his role in her family's misfortunes, which already kind of speaks to what her motivation is, if that makes sense. But then you get to book 7, and Narcissa is seen doing everything she can just to keep her family safe, encouraging Lucius to keep the peace, literally pulling her son out of harm's way during the struggle at the manor, and then committing the ultimate betrayal towards the end by lying to Voldemort that Harry is dead, all to save her son. And then when everyone re-enters the castle, she and her husband aren't even trying to fight anybody. They're just running through the crowd, screaming for their son, trying to find him. It's like, I'm not saying that Narcissa is a good person or anything, but there is no denying that she loves her family. Now, I know that she's a side character and there's no real need to flesh out her character on screen, but during the few times she does appear in the films, almost none of this is reflected in her character. Narcissa in the films pretty much never shows any emotion at all. The most she ever does is tear up, and there is no sense of the desperation she feels to save her family. In the beginning of Half-Blood Prince, when she comes to Snape to ask for help, honestly, from her demeanor, she could have been there to discuss the next Death Eater barbecue and if Snape was gonna bring something this time or not. Just nothing. Freaking Bellatrix shows more emotion than Narcissa does, and she's probably the most heartless character in the series, aside from her beloved master. I feel like her character was done a massive disservice in the films, portrayal-wise, and appearance-wise as well. I mean, you didn't have to make her blonde, but who thought this skunk hairdo was a good idea? I feel like someone was going for a Cruella vibe, or that it's supposed to be a representation of the duality of her character and the conflict between her loyalties to the dark side and her family, but really? Skunk? When I first saw the promo image for this character, I was like, who is that supposed to be? And then I found out it's supposed to be Narcissa, and I was just like, no, bad idea, do something. Oh no. Anyway, so yeah, I really wish the bond between Narcissa and Draco had been a bit more established in the films, so not only would her character motivations make more sense, but also so you could give her that sense of desperation, and also so that her character had some sort of emotional arc, no matter how small it was. Fleur Delacour. I really feel like I am the only one who doesn't like Clémence Poésy as Fleur Delacour, but to me, she really was just all wrong for the part. For one, Fleur is part Veela, which was just kind of glossed right over in the films. But being part Veela really does influence a lot of her character and personality, and it's just really sad it was kind of not really touched on in the films. Okay, this is from the Veela Wikia page. Veela were described as looking like incredibly beautiful human women with moon-bright skin and white gold hair that fanned out behind them despite the absence of wind. They had the ability to hypnotize and mesmerize most people attracted to women with their seductive dance who would try to impress them. Veela had their own type of magic which did not require a wand. Their magic was usually used to add to their natural appeal and attract more people. When Veela became angry, however, they could transform into something more like harpies. Their face turned into cruel, beaked, bird-like heads, while long, scaly wings burst from their shoulders, and they could launch balls of fire from their hands. Veela seemed to be quite an erasable race. And despite only being part Veela, Fleur in the books is described as having these two specific traits: extreme, almost supernatural beauty, and a quick temper. It takes nothing at all for her to get angry. She tosses her hair and stomps her feet, and is the only champion to be actively angry about Harry's inclusion in the tournament. She constantly complains about Hogwarts accommodations, snatches the ointment away from Mrs. Weasley after she feels insulted. None of this is present in her on-screen portrayal. In fact, for the most part, Fleur is just there in the film series. Granted, she is a background character, so it's not really important for her character to be fleshed out, but if she's gonna be there, then at least give her a personality, you know? I was always so bored when her character came on screen, and on the rare occasion Fleur did show emotion in the films, you don't really feel it, and to be honest, it even seems out of place. Like, she screams when Harry and Cedric return. Why? Yes, Cedric's death was terrible, but her reaction was just odd, especially when you consider that pretty much every other time you see her in the films, even when she and her guests are ambushed and attacked at her own wedding, she's more of the silent strength type rather than a screamer. It could have been shock, yeah, but I really always just thought that was weird. Now, if they'd had Cho scream, then that would have made sense and hit a lot harder. Or even Hermione, someone connected to the two people returning. But Fleur? Just no. And it's really weird to me that they had Fleur show more emotion over Cedric than her own sister, who she believed almost died. In the books, Fleur is the only champion besides Harry to believe that the hostages during the second task were in real danger, and is in a state of panic when she fails to complete the task and believes that her sister is hurt as a result. She is so distraught that she has to be physically restrained, and thereafter is eternally grateful to Harry for saving her sister in addition to his own hostage. It completely changes her attitude towards Harry and seemingly Hogwarts by extension, as she seems to complain less afterwards, but even years later, she still shows gratitude towards him. In fact, Fleur's a bit like Narcissa, where she's a bit of a snobby character, but when it comes to her family, she's ride or die. And Fleur's character definitely got what we could call the Narcissa treatment, where they took a good emotional root, decided to chop it up, and replace it with an emotionless stand-in. Fleur is a very emotional character, displaying fear, anger, shame, gratitude, and on screen she mostly just stands there, and that's my biggest problem with her portrayal. Just, her character does a whole lot of nothing. And then, I'm sorry, but I really don't feel like Clémence was right for Fleur in appearance either. Fleur's description, as described by Harry, is: a young woman was standing in the doorway, a woman of such breathtaking beauty that the room seemed to have become strangely airless. She was tall and willowy, with long blonde hair, and appeared to emanate a faint silvery glow. Now, based on this description, I look at Clémence and I just don't see it. I mean, here's what I'm talking about. Of these two photos, the one on the left is Clémence, and the one on the right is an AI-generated image from a Bored Panda article based on Fleur's book description. And to me, that one is so much more accurate. Yeah, it's not exactly what I see in my head, but it's a lot closer than I think Clémence was. Don't get me wrong, I don't expect a 100% accurate book-to-screen character, but when the character is described as having an almost supernatural level of beauty, then you really should pay more care to the casting, and to me, it didn't happen. I feel like I sound so superficial, but I just don't think she was right. Definitely not the worst offender on this list, don't get me wrong, but definitely not a character I feel they really did justice to. And next, Gary Oldman as Sirius Black. I'm sorry, but if I had to pick the worst casting choice on this list, Gary Oldman as Sirius Black would probably be at the top of it. I think this is a perfect example of what happens when you favor star power over someone who's actually right for the role. For one, Gary Oldman was far older than the character he was playing, and it showed. He was a 45-year-old, I believe, when he was cast in Prisoner of Azkaban as Sirius, who is in his early 30s. And even if you account for Azkaban having aged him, there's no way Sirius should have looked that old. This is Sirius's description. Sirius is described as a tall man with long black hair and gray eyes. Several times during the series, Sirius is stated to be very good-looking and carelessly handsome prior to his imprisonment. Harry also noted that as a teenager, Sirius always had a slightly spoiled, haughty look on his face. His long years in Azkaban made his face gaunt, and lack of grooming resulted in long, dirty hair and yellow teeth. Harry's first impression of Sirius is of a corpse. So, just on the visual level, I don't feel Gary was Sirius. And that Bored Panda article I mentioned earlier, they also did one for Sirius, and to me, this is a much more accurate idea of what his character would look like. But what really gets to me is the performance. Don't get me wrong, Gary had some funny lines.
Brilliant, Snape. Once again, you put your keen and penetrating mind to the task, and as usual, come to the wrong conclusion.
Severus, don't be a fool.
He can't help it, it's habit by
Sirius,
now.
be quiet!
Quiet yourself, Remus!
Listen to you two, quarrelling like an old married couple.
Why don't you run along and play with your chemistry set?
But for the most part, it just always felt off. His ranting and raving like a madman in Prisoner of Azkaban was so far removed from the real Sirius, who was dark and brooding and haunted and very quiet and direct, but never went around acting like a Looney Tune shouting at everyone either. In fact, Sirius actually says that discovering Peter was at Hogwarts just waiting for an opportunity to strike actually made him more clear, more sane, and allowed him to find the mental acuity needed to escape prison and come rescue Harry. In the films, they did the complete opposite.
I did my waiting! 12 years of it! In Azkaban!
And even the madman he was in Prisoner of Azkaban isn't as bad as what they did to him in Order of the Phoenix. I mean, Sirius is something of a wild child. He doesn't take anything as seriously as the adults around him seem to, and he's much more relaxed. He's not nearly as uptight, and yet in Order of the Phoenix, every time I see him, all I think is uptight, 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 and part of that is on the costumes. I mean, look at these outfits. Do any of these say former bad boy haunted by the murders of his best friends and imprisoned for crimes he did not commit? Absolutely not. If anything, they're the complete opposite of what Sirius would ever wear. I mean, in the books, it is well established that Sirius detested his family and what they stood for with their pureblood mania and showed distaste at the family home and everything in it. And in Deathly Hallows, we found out that Sirius also did everything he could to set himself apart from his family, even if all that meant was filling his room with Gryffindor colors and other things. But the point is, Sirius hated wealth. Sirius hated status. Sirius hated green. And so not only do they stuff his character into these little pompous vests and suits,
They were real that day I wore a vest, because that vest was disgusting.
but he's usually wearing green. Green! The Slytherin color that the Black House was plastered with and reminds him so much of the family he'd been trying to get away from. He specifically tried to be the opposite of all that. And so why? Why? Why would you do that? Do you not know this character at all? And the tattoos, really? Really? I cannot believe anybody thought that was a good idea. I mean, I tried Googling how that even came to be, and I saw this. Sirius's tattoos aren't just random squiggly lines. Instead, as some eagle-eyed Redditors point out, the tattoos are actually alchemical? Yeah, I can't say that. Symbols and might be references to Sirius's animagus form. The big tattoo by his sternum is the symbol for amalgamation, which is linked to the gray wolf. This might have something to do with his ability to become a dog, or maybe even signify Remus. The one on his lower right pec is similar to the symbol for steel, but rotated 90 degrees. You couldn't think of any other way to do that, to reference his animagus forms or his connection to anybody else in the series. You had to cover him with tattoos. I'm sorry, that's just not serious to me, and I really, really hate what they did with his character. I really do. And then, the biggest slap in the face to this character.
Nice one, James!
I frickin' hate that line. With that one line, you completely destroy the relationship he had with Harry, as the parental figure Harry never had, by basically implying that Sirius just sees him as a stand-in for his dead best friend, and it's like, so insulting. Sirius definitely saw James and Harry. Most people did. And there's no denying that Sirius could be a bit reckless and live vicariously through Harry at times, but he knew Harry was Harry. He gave Harry good advice, tried to be there for Harry as much as possible, was distraught after what Harry went through in the graveyard. He was a good godfather and friend to Harry. The first real sense of family, and then you just...
Nice one, James!
Yep, I'm done with his character. Moving on. And speaking of words I cannot pronounce, Ralph Fiennes? Ralph Fiennes? Is that how you say his name? Him as Voldemort. Weirdly enough, I actually find Voldemort to be a really fascinating villain. I mean, he's such a complex character with a really interesting and mysterious background. I still want to know what happened in that cave. What did he do that messed those kids up that bad? Like, talk about nightmare fuel. And it's actually one of the reasons Book 6 is one of my favorites. I love the deep dive into Voldemort/Tom Riddle and learning how he came to be who he was. Reading about him in the books is absolutely fascinating to me. It's intriguing to me that a character that has done his utmost best to transcend humanity is so human, especially when it comes to anger. No matter how calm Voldemort appears to be, no matter how softly he speaks, he is always so angry. That carefully crafted exterior of power and control evaporates the moment he gets mad, and he'll just start screaming and attacking in unrestrained fits of rage. And you would think, with how much damage he's done to his body and soul, that this would kind of level itself out over time, but if anything, it gets worse. The more he fails to take out Harry, the more his plans get messed up, the more Voldemort starts losing his crap. And it wasn't funny, it wasn't amusing, it was terrifying. Even Bellatrix, his little fangirl, knew that if they pissed him off, they'd be next in line. And yet, this is one of the main reasons why I cannot stand his on-screen portrayal and never could. Pretty much everything about Voldemort's personality was just thrown away in the films. The high cold voice, the burning anger, the obsession with power and control, the fearsome appearance of chalk-like skin, red snake-like eyes, and a skull-like face with slits for nostrils, the stillness, none of it. Instead, we get this almost comical-looking character who is constantly moving about, laughing like a maniac and speaking in a low rasp that sounds like he constantly has a cold.
13 years it's been.
Like, what is apparently so scary about this character? It's a bit hard for me to articulate why I hate it so much. So I tried looking up what other people thought of his portrayal, and I really, really like what this comment on Quora, I hope I said that right, had to say about his portrayal. I have to say it was disappointing. Ralph Fiennes did not read the book. In fact, he just landed up because of his nephew's interest. That said, this fact is obvious in his portrayal. He seems to have no background of the character of Voldemort. Or is it those scriptwriters? Or was it his own improv? I felt Rowling's work went in vain. He did not have a cold voice. He kept tripping and falling throughout the movies. In one of the instances, he loses some energy and falls down, and one of the Death Eaters says, "My lord," and he just kills them. He is helped by Bellatrix in the end to his feet and says, "I can help myself." That was hilarious. He offers a seat to Severus Snape in the first movie, which I assume they mean the first Deathly Hallows movie, and says, "Severus, I have found a place for you." Voldemort does not offer to find a place for any person or thing. All of this made the Voldemort performance unintentionally hilarious. A lot of people laughed in the movie halls. Though he may be okay for the role, he strayed away from the careful characterization of Voldemort by J.K.R. Could have done his homework by reading the books, especially when he was playing Voldemort. And yeah, I have to say I agree. They really did just throw his characterization out the window. And I know that at least some of that was due to himself. For example, the hug in Deathly Hallows, even Tom Felton, the guy who got hugged, didn't know he was going to do that. And it's just so weird. Voldemort would never, I mean never, hug anybody. In fact, other than grabbing Bellatrix to disapparate, did he ever make physical contact with anyone? He's just not a touchy-feely person, and definitely not a hugger. It's one of the reasons I cannot stand The Cursed Child. And I find it very frustrating that J.K. Rowling and company are trying to tell us it's canon, which, as a side, is something else I'm getting really tired of these days. I'm so tired of people deciding to do sequels, prequels, etc. that confuse or completely contradict the characters and or world they're built on, and we're just expected to believe it, no questions asked. It's ridiculous, and it's one of the reasons I pretty much refuse to watch sequels now. And Cursed Child is a good example of why. Voldemort was not a sexual character. He would never have done the dirty with anyone, not even Bellatrix, and definitely not to procreate. Voldemort hated competition, hated the idea of anyone powerful enough to challenge him. It's the main reason he went after Harry in the first place. But we're expected to believe that he's decided to try and conceive a child who could full well grow up and be powerful, aka a challenge to him and his authority? No way. I don't care what anybody says. Cursed Child is not canon. To me, anyway. Though I have to admit, I do like Scorpius. But, yeah. I could have gotten over Voldemort's less than frightening appearance, especially since I know this is supposed to be like a family-friendly series, if he had just been played well. But to me, Ralph Fiennes managed to take an iconic character and turn them into a complete joke. There is literally only one scene I can stand him in, this one, because I think it's cool.
After tonight, no one will ever again question my powers. After tonight, if they speak of you, they'll speak only of how you begged for death, and I, being a merciful lord, obliged.
But other than that, a character I can't get enough of in the books is one I essentially skip in the movies, which is sad because he's the effing main villain. But I digress. Michael Gambon as Dumbledore. I know that Richard Harris sadly passed away in between Chamber of Secrets and Prisoner of Azkaban, so of course they had to recast the role to go on, but it's like they replaced the entire character. Book Dumbledore is quiet, polite, friendly, observant, venerable. He comes across as a very warm and very wise character in general, and Richard Harris did a good job of portraying that on screen.
Down in the dungeons between you and Professor Quirrell is a complete secret. So, naturally, the whole school knows.
Including the twinkle Dumbledore was sometimes described as having in his eyes. But they just threw all of that away in movie 3. With Michael Gambon's Dumbledore being restless, aggressive, callous to the point of being rude, and honestly just boring. Like, I'm sorry, but really, every time he's speaking as Dumbledore, I just don't feel anything. Which is weird because I love Dumbledore's dialogue. He is the walking, talking example of the quote, wise men speak because they have something to say. Dumbledore never talks to hear himself speak. Dumbledore is very careful with his words. He waits, hears everyone out, and carefully chooses what he will say in response. He knows there is weight to his words, so he measures them carefully. But Michael's Dumbledore is just like a bit of a bully, really. He shoves Harry, yells at him, and even when he's delivering lines that are supposed to be wise and inspiring, it's kind of like listening to Professor Binns, really. I don't feel anything. And his appearance is a bit off for me, too. Like, one thing that always got me about Dumbledore was his piercing blue eyes. I always kind of felt like they represented a sky where they're shiny and bright when things are going well, but the twinkle goes out like an overcast sky when he's upset, or there's a storm in them when he's angry. To me, it was always really beautiful imagery and a great way to portray Dumbledore's emotions without him having to say anything. But Michael's eyes just always seem so dark and empty to me, and beyond the dialogue and general mannerisms, that's where I really just can't see Dumbledore in him. Like Voldemort, there's really only 2 scenes I actually like of his.
He's free. We did it.
Did what? Good night.
To me, there's just no passion in his performance. Dumbledore is magnetic in the books. When he's speaking, everyone is paying attention, even the reader. In the films, it's like watching paint dry. I'm sorry, but when he's delivering lines, even ones that are supposed to really hit home with Harry in the audience, he's pretty much just reciting lines. Like, the one that always really gets to me is Deathly Hallows. At the end of Book 6, Dumbledore died, and Harry has spent pretty much the entirety of Book 7 upset with Dumbledore, frustrated that he told him so little and expected him to do so much, and, upset that they had so much in common and that there were so many things Dumbledore didn't tell him about his past and their connections, and he ends up wondering if Dumbledore ever cared about him at all. And by the time he has to get into Hogwarts to get the diadem, when he's talking to Aberforth, he realizes that Dumbledore isn't exactly the man he thought he was, but he still has to do this. Regardless of anything else, he's the only one who can. And then you deal with the battle and everything that goes on there and everyone who dies. And then Harry has to sacrifice himself, which he realizes that Dumbledore always intended. Basically, that Dumbledore was always setting him up to die. And it's just like, that has got to be so soul-crushing. It is like the confirmation of Harry's worst fears, that Dumbledore really did never care for him. And then he sacrifices himself, and there's Dumbledore. Both his hands are undamaged, and it's like, after all this time, after everything the characters have gone through and the readers have went through with them, here is the man that is the source of so much of Harry's pain throughout the previous book. And, you get to see Dumbledore really open up now that there is no more room for secrets. Harry already knows everything. Dumbledore cries. He seeks Harry's approval and I think even his forgiveness. And it is such a beautiful scene. It means so much to me that they got this reunion and that Harry got to talk to Dumbledore about what he was put through. And then he realized that Dumbledore always did care about him. He made it hard so that Harry wouldn't make his same mistakes. Was Dumbledore perfect? No. But he did care about Harry. He did love Harry. He wanted to give him the absolute best chance for survival. And I think that, more than anything, is what made Harry go back. I really, really love that. And then Harry asks if any of this is real or if it's just happening in his head. And Dumbledore offers one last amazing quote, which is, "Of course this is all happening in your head, but why on earth should that mean it's not real?" And it's just like, this is why we love Dumbledore. And then I'll get back to the scene in a minute because I want to mention the movie. But after this, in the books, when the battle is over and they enter the headmaster's study and all the portraits cheer for him and Dumbledore's is there crying because he's so proud of Harry. Like, that makes me want to cry right now. Like, of all the tearjerker moments in the series, for some reason, that just really hits me right in the heart. It is so beautiful. I love their relationship. Even the bad parts. It's such a roller coaster, and I think we can all relate to what Harry felt, wondering if someone actually cared about you because their actions seem to say the complete opposite. I think we've all experienced something like that in life. Unfortunately, I mean, obviously no one should have to experience that, but point is, you get so much emotion from that. And then Dumbledore in the movies, that same scene, maybe it's because I knew it was coming, but I don't think so, but I feel nothing. I don't feel anything at their reunion. I don't feel anything about seeing Dumbledore again. I don't even feel anything when he delivers the line I love so much.
Of
course it's happening inside your head, Harry. Why should that mean that it's not real?
That's what I mean. There's just so much emptiness in this performance for me. I don't know who I would have cast in the role. Probably Ian McKellen, but I understand why he wasn't. But, I don't know. To me, that performance was just not it. And that's it. Those are my 5 least favorite castings in the entirety of Harry Potter. Narcissa Malfoy, Fleur Delacour, Sirius Black, Voldemort, and Dumbledore. I should say the second Dumbledore. Although that was kind of the second Voldemort too, if you think about it, because a different guy played him in Sorcerer's Stone, but we're not talking about him. I digress. Point is, I don't really care for the way these 5 characters were cast, and to be honest, I just kind of skip when they show up, or I watch the scene ironically. So, yeah, I mean, let me know. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? Just please keep in mind, these are just opinions, and I'm not trying to offend anybody or hurt their feelings, so, please just keep that in mind. But, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had to say. I don't think my next video is going to be a Harry Potter one, because I was recently reminded of a movie that I saw that I really couldn't stand, so I was kind of thinking about doing something on that, but thank you so much for watching if you did. I really do appreciate it, and I hope anyone or everyone watching has a great day. Or night, depending on where you are. Bye!